In the heart of an uncharted galaxy, where stars shimmered like scattered diamonds against the velvet expanse of space, there existed a planet unlike any other. Its surface gleamed with crystalline formations that refracted light into prismatic hues, painting the skies in perpetual rainbows. This was Aara, home to an alien civilization known for their ethereal beauty and enigmatic ways, a race whose very presence seemed to defy the natural order of things. The people of Aara were tall and slender, their skin radiating a soft luminescence that shifted between shades of silver and gold depending on their emotions. Their eyes, large and almond-shaped, glowed faintly with an inner fire, as though they carried fragments of their starlit heavens within them. They moved with grace so fluid it appeared almost supernatural, each gesture deliberate yet effortless, as if choreographed by some unseen cosmic force. But what truly set them apart was not merely their appearance. It was the aura of serenity they exuded, an energy that whispered of ancient wisdom and untold secrets. Among these beings stood one who shone brighter than all others, Princess Aara. She was the embodiment of her race's splendor, her form more radiant, her movements more hypnotic. Her hair cascaded down her back in waves of liquid platinum, catching the light like spun glass. The markings adorning her arms and neck, delicate patterns resembling constellations, seemed alive, pulsing gently with every breath she took. To look upon her was to feel both awe and insignificance, for she appeared less like a mortal being and more like a living fragment of the cosmos itself. Yet, despite her unparalleled beauty, Aara remained distant, cloaked in an impenetrable veil of mystery. No one dared approach her, not even those of her own kind. It wasn't fear alone that kept them at bay but something deeper, an instinctive understanding that she was untouchable, sacred. Her presence commanded reverence, yet it also invoked unease, as though standing too close might burn one's soul. And so, she walked among her people like a phantom, revered yet unreachable, her isolation self-imposed yet absolute. It was said that anyone who attempted to breach the invisible barrier around her would be met with consequences beyond comprehension. Some claimed her gaze could unravel minds, while others whispered of a power within her capable of bending reality itself. Whether myth or truth, no one wished to test the limits of her forbearance. Thus, the princess remained solitary, drifting through the opulent halls of her palace like a ghost, untouched by time or desire. Far from the glittering spires of Aara, aboard a battered freighter navigating the fringes of explored space, lived Kale Draven. A human male with calloused hands and weary eyes, he bore the weight of countless battles and broken dreams. Once a soldier in humanity's interstellar fleet, Kale had abandoned his post after witnessing horrors no man should endure. Planets reduced to ash, civilizations erased without mercy, and comrades lost to the cold void of space. He now eked out a meager existence as a scavenger, salvaging derelict ships and forgotten relics from the wreckage of war-torn sectors. Kale's life was solitary by necessity rather than choice. His rough exterior masked a sharp mind and a restless spirit, traits that often landed him in trouble when paired with his stubborn refusal to conform. Where others saw danger, he saw opportunity. Where they saw despair, he glimpsed hope. Yet, this defiance came at a cost. Years spent defying authority figures and sidestepping galactic law had left him marked, an outlaw in the eyes of many, mistrusted and reviled. Despite his hardened shell, there was a flicker of idealism buried deep within Kale, a belief that even amidst chaos, connection mattered. He'd seen enough cruelty to know how fragile bonds could be, yet he clung to the idea that understanding between beings, even vastly different ones, could bridge divides. This philosophy, though rarely vocalized, guided his actions in subtle ways. When faced with choices, he leaned toward compassion over convenience, empathy over indifference. His arrival on Aara was accidental, born of desperation rather than intent. Pursued by mercenaries after intercepting classified data about the planet's resources, Kale crash-landed on its surface during a violent storm. The impact left his ship crippled, forcing him to seek refuge in the nearest settlement. What greeted him was nothing short of surreal, the crystalline landscape glowing faintly under twin moons, the air humming with an energy that felt almost alive. More astonishing still were the inhabitants themselves, luminous figures moving with an elegance that bordered on otherworldly. At first glance, Kale knew he didn't belong here. His weathered face and tattered clothing stood in stark contrast to the pristine perfection surrounding him. Yet, instead of retreating into the shadows, he found himself drawn to the center of this alien world, compelled by curiosity and perhaps something deeper, a yearning to understand what lay beneath the surface of such radiant beauty. It began with whispers, murmurs rippling through the crystalline streets of Aara's capital city. The humans had come again, scavengers trespassing on sacred ground, driven by greed or folly. Among them was one who lingered longer than the rest, his presence unsettling in its persistence. The locals spoke of him cautiously, their voices hushed as though afraid the mere mention of his name might summon misfortune. They called him the Shadowed One, for his darkened features and coarse attire seemed incongruous against the shimmering brilliance of their world. Yet it wasn't just his appearance that unsettled them, it was the way he looked at things, as if seeing beyond the surface, piercing through layers of illusion to glimpse truths hidden from ordinary eyes. For days, Kale wandered the city, observing everything with an intensity that unnerved its inhabitants. He studied their movements, noting how they avoided direct contact, how their glowing eyes darted away whenever he approached. At first, he attributed their aloofness to cultural differences, but soon it became clear there was something more, a collective fear woven into the fabric of their society. It was as if they were guarding a secret, shielding themselves from an unseen threat. Then, one evening, under the pale glow of the twin moons, Kale encountered her. She emerged from the grand entrance of the central palace, flanked by attendants whose deference bordered on worship. Princess Aara moved like a vision, her luminous form casting soft reflections onto the crystalline pathways. Time seemed to slow as she passed, her gaze sweeping across the crowd gathered to witness her rare public appearance. Most lowered their heads in reverence, unwilling, or unable, to meet her eyes. But Kale did not look away. Their gazes locked, and for a moment, the world around them dissolved. There was no sound, no movement, only the unbroken connection between two beings separated by species, culture, and perhaps even dimensions. In that instant, Kale felt something stir within him, a pull stronger than anything he'd ever experienced. It wasn't lust or admiration. It was recognition, as though some part of him had been waiting for this moment without knowing why. For her part, Aara paused, her expression unreadable behind the ethereal mask of serenity she wore. Then, as quickly as it began, the moment ended. She turned and continued on her path, leaving Kale rooted to the spot, his heart pounding in his chest. Word spread swiftly among the Valerians. The Shadowed One had dared to look upon their princess, not just look, but hold her gaze. Such audacity was unheard of, a breach of protocol so profound it bordered on sacrilege. Whispers grew louder, tinged with both fascination and dread. What manner of creature was this human, who defied the unspoken rules binding their society? Some believed him reckless, a fool unaware of the dangers lurking beneath Aara's radiant exterior. Others saw something else in his boldness, a spark of courage, perhaps even destiny. Kale, however, paid little heed to the murmurs trailing in his wake. Instead, he found himself increasingly consumed by thoughts of the princess. Each night, as he sat alone in the dimly lit quarters of his makeshift shelter, images of her danced before his mind's eye. Her luminous skin, the intricate patterns etched into her flesh, the way her presence seemed to bend the very air around her. All of it lingered, refusing to fade. He couldn't explain why she fascinated him so deeply, nor could he ignore the growing certainty that she held answers to questions he hadn't yet asked. Driven by a compulsion he couldn't suppress, Kale returned to the palace grounds the following day. This time, he positioned himself closer to the entrance, ignoring the wary glances of passers-by. Hours passed, and just as doubt began to creep into his resolve, she appeared once more. Again, her attendants formed a protective circle around her, their bodies tense, ready to shield her from any perceived threat. Yet, when Aara stepped into view, Kale noticed something new, a faint hesitation in her step, a subtle shift in her posture that suggested awareness of his presence. Summoning every ounce of determination, Kale stepped forward, breaking through the invisible barrier that kept others at bay. Gasps erupted from the crowd, followed by urgent whispers urging him to retreat. But Kale ignored them, his focus entirely on the figure before him. As he drew nearer, he realized she was watching him, not with hostility, but with an intensity that mirrored his own. The air between them crackled with tension, charged with an energy neither could fully comprehend. "Why do you follow me?" Her voice, when it finally came, was melodic yet edged with authority, each word resonating like a chime struck in perfect harmony. Kale hesitated, searching for an answer that made sense even to himself. "I don't know," he admitted at last, his tone steady despite the turmoil swirling inside him. "But I can't stay away." Her luminous eyes narrowed slightly, studying him as though trying to decipher a puzzle. Then, without another word, she turned and disappeared into the palace, her attendants rushing to close the doors behind her. Cale stood frozen, unsure whether he had succeeded or failed. But one thing was certain: he had crossed a line, breached a boundary no one else dared challenge. And now, whatever awaited him next, he knew there was no turning back. Days stretched into weeks, and Cale found himself caught in a liminal space, suspended between defiance and uncertainty. The palace guards had begun to recognize his face, their expressions shifting from outright hostility to a begrudging acknowledgement of his persistence. Each morning, he stationed himself near the gates, waiting for any sign of Aaronian. Sometimes hours passed without so much as a glimpse of her. Other times, she would appear briefly, always surrounded by her entourage, always maintaining that same careful distance. Yet, there were moments, fleeting, almost imperceptible, when their eyes would meet, and Cale swore he saw something flicker in hers. Doubt, curiosity, or perhaps something else entirely. The townsfolk, meanwhile, regarded him with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Some whispered that he was either incredibly brave or profoundly foolish, while others speculated that his audacity might bring ruin upon them all. Rumors swirled about curses and divine retribution, tales of those who had once dared approach the princess only to vanish without a trace. Cale dismissed these warnings, though not without a pang of unease. He couldn't deny the strange energy that permeated the air whenever he ventured too close to the palace, an almost palpable force that seemed to push back against his intrusion. Still, he pressed on, driven by a conviction he couldn't articulate. One evening, as twilight bathed the crystalline city in hues of lavender and gold, Cale decided to take a different approach. Instead of lingering near the palace gates, he wandered deeper into the city, seeking out places where the Valerian elite gathered. Ornate gardens stretched beneath domed ceilings of translucent crystal, their paths lined with flora that pulsed faintly with bioluminescent light. Fountains bubbled softly, their waters imbued with a silvery sheen that reflected the stars above. Here, amid the opulence, Cale hoped to gain insight into the enigmatic culture surrounding Aaronian. He listened intently to conversations, piecing together fragments of information. The Valerians spoke of their history with reverence, recounting legends of their ancestors' communion with celestial forces. They described rituals of ascension, ceremonies where individuals were chosen to serve as conduits for cosmic energies. Though Cale struggled to grasp the full implications of their words, one recurring theme stood out. The princess was not merely a ruler but a vessel, a being intertwined with the very essence of their world. Her isolation, they implied, was not by choice but necessity, a safeguard meant to protect both her and those around her. As Cale absorbed these revelations, a new thought began to take root in his mind. Perhaps it wasn't just curiosity driving him toward Aaronian. Perhaps there was a deeper purpose, a reason he had been drawn to her against all odds. The realization unsettled him, stirring memories of battles fought and lives lost, of promises made and broken. Could it be that his journey had led him here for a reason greater than survival or escape? That night, unable to sleep, Cale returned to the palace grounds. The moonlight cast long shadows across the crystalline pathways, lending the scene an eerie beauty. Standing at the edge of the courtyard, he gazed up at the towering spires of the palace, wondering what secrets lay hidden within its walls. Just then, a soft rustling sound broke the silence. Turning sharply, he saw a figure emerge from the shadows, not one of the guards, but someone smaller, cloaked in a hooded robe. The figure approached cautiously, stopping just within earshot. When the hood fell back, revealing delicate features framed by silver-streaked hair, Cale recognized her immediately, one of Aaronian's attendants. Her luminous eyes darted nervously around before settling on him. "You are persistent," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "More than anyone has been in centuries." Cale frowned, unsure whether to trust her. "What do you want?" She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone to appear. "The princess, she watches you," the attendant admitted, her tone tinged with both wonder and fear. "She sees something in you, though none of us understand what it is. But beware, Her favor carries risks you cannot imagine." Before Kale could respond, the attendant slipped back into the shadows, leaving him alone with his thoughts. The warning lingered in his mind, heavy and foreboding. Yet, far from deterring him, it only strengthened his resolve. Whatever lay ahead, he knew he had to face it, not just for himself, but for reasons he was only beginning to comprehend. In the days that followed, Kale noticed subtle changes in the dynamics surrounding Aaronian. The guards stationed outside the palace gates adopted stiffer postures, their weapons glinting ominously under the sun's rays. Attendants who had previously maintained a respectful distance now exchanged hurried whispers, their glowing eyes darting toward him with increasing frequency. Even the citizens of Aara seemed to move with heightened tension, their usual grace marred by an undercurrent of unease. It was as though his repeated attempts to reach the princess had disrupted some delicate equilibrium, setting off ripples that extended far beyond the boundaries of the palace. The most noticeable shift, however, occurred within Kale himself. With each passing encounter, his determination grew sharper, honed by both the resistance he faced and the cryptic messages he received. The attendant's warning echoed in his mind, mingling with fragments of overheard conversations about rituals and cosmic forces. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge, one that hinted at a purpose larger than his initial impulse to connect with Aaronian. He started to see his pursuit not as an act of defiance but as a response to an unspoken call, a convergence of destinies written in the stars. This newfound clarity brought with it a surge of confidence. Kale no longer approached the palace gates as a supplicant, but as someone stepping into a role fate had carved for him. His demeanor softened, his movements more deliberate, as though he were aligning himself with an ancient rhythm he had only recently begun to hear. The guards, sensing this transformation, reacted with a mix of suspicion and reluctant respect. Their stares grew less hostile, replaced by guarded curiosity. Some even nodded curtly in acknowledgement, a silent admission that he was no ordinary intruder. Aaronian herself seemed attuned to the change. During their brief encounters, her gaze lingered longer, her expression betraying flashes of emotion that defied her otherwise serene facade. There was a question in her eyes now, one she dared not voice aloud. Kale interpreted it as permission, or perhaps a challenge, to continue pushing forward, to delve deeper into the mysteries she guarded so fiercely. One afternoon, as Kale stood near the palace entrance, a group of elders approached him. Cloaked in robes adorned with intricate patterns resembling constellations, they radiated an aura of authority that commanded immediate attention. Their leader, a tall figure with markings that shimmered like molten gold, addressed him directly. "You have tested our patience, outsider," the elder intoned, his voice resonant and unwavering. "Tell us why you persist in disturbing what must remain undisturbed." Kale met the elder's gaze without flinching. "I don't claim to understand everything about your world," he replied, his tone measured but firm. "But I know there's something here worth fighting for. Something bigger than me, bigger than you, maybe even bigger than your princess. If you think turning me away will make it go away, you're wrong." The elder's expression hardened, but before he could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "Enough." It was Aaronian, emerging from the palace with an air of quiet authority that silenced everyone present. She stepped forward, her luminous form casting soft reflections on the crystalline floor. For a moment, she simply observed the scene, her glowing eyes scanning each face in turn. Then, addressing the elders, she said, "Let him speak. Let him stay." The declaration sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. Murmurs erupted, laced with disbelief and apprehension. The elders exchanged uneasy glances, their postures stiffening as though bracing for calamity. Yet, none dared contradict her. Slowly, they dispersed, leaving Kale and Aaronian alone in the vast courtyard. For the first time, Kale allowed himself to fully absorb her presence. Up close, the markings on her skin seemed to pulse with a life of their own, their constellational patterns shifting subtly as though mirroring the movement of distant stars. Her gaze was unwavering, filled with a complexity that defied easy interpretation. Was it gratitude? Caution? Or perhaps a plea for understanding? "You've placed yourself in great danger," she said finally, her melodic voice carrying a weight that sent shivers down his spine. "Do you truly understand what you're risking?" Kale nodded, though the truth was he didn't fully grasp the scope of the peril she hinted at. All he knew was that turning back was no longer an option. "I'm willing to find out," he replied, his voice steady despite the knot tightening in his chest. Alarian studied him for a long moment, her expression inscrutable. Then, with a gesture so slight it might have gone unnoticed, she beckoned him to follow. Without hesitation, Cale obeyed, stepping into the shadow of the palace as the massive doors swung open behind her. Beyond lay corridors bathed in iridescent light, their walls adorned with murals depicting scenes of celestial harmony and cosmic upheaval. Every step felt like crossing into another realm, one where time flowed differently and reality bent to unseen forces. As they walked, Alarian began to speak, her words weaving together fragments of myth and memory. She told him of her people's origins, of how they had once been bound to the stars themselves, their very existence tied to the balance of universal energies. Over millennia, they had learned to harness these forces, using them to sustain their world and guide its evolution. But such power came at a cost. Those chosen as vessels, like herself, were forever isolated, their lives intertwined with responsibilities too immense for others to bear. Cale listened intently, his mind racing to process the enormity of what she revealed. Each sentence painted a picture of a civilization teetering on the brink of collapse, its foundations eroded by internal strife and external threats. And at the center of it all stood Alarian, bearing burdens no single being should endure. Yet, amid the gravity of her words, there was also a thread of vulnerability, a longing for connection that resonated deeply within him. They reached a chamber unlike any Cale had seen before. Its ceiling stretched impossibly high, disappearing into darkness dotted with pinpricks of light resembling a night sky. In the center of the room floated a crystalline structure, its facets refracting beams of multicolored light that danced across the walls. Alarian approached it reverently, placing her hand against its surface. The crystal responded instantly, glowing brighter as tendrils of energy snaked outward, enveloping her in a cocoon of radiant light. "This is the nexus," she explained, her voice echoing softly in the cavernous space. "It binds us to the cosmos, sustains our world. But it is also unstable. My presence keeps it in check, but even I cannot maintain this balance indefinitely." Cale's breath caught in his throat as realization dawned. This wasn't just about her, it was about survival, the survival of an entire civilization hanging precariously in the balance. He understood now why she had been so guarded, why her people treated her with such reverence and fear. But understanding brought with it a crushing weight. How could he, a mere human, possibly contribute to something so vast and incomprehensible? Before he could voice his doubts, Alarian turned to face him, her expression resolute. "You carry something within you," she said, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that left no room for denial. "Something that resonates with the nexus. I felt it the first time our gazes met. That is why I let you stay." The admission hit him like a tidal wave, washing away the remnants of hesitation. Whatever she sensed in him, whatever latent potential she believed he possessed, it wasn't something he could ignore. Not anymore. As they stood there, surrounded by the hum of cosmic energy and the weight of untold histories, Cale made a silent vow. He would uncover the truth, not just for himself, but for her people, and for the fragile tapestry of existence that depended on their success. The days that followed blurred into a kaleidoscope of discovery and reckoning. Cale spent hours within the Nexus chamber, his presence tolerated, if not welcomed, by the crystalline entity that pulsed with an intelligence older than stars. Alarian guided him through rituals unfamiliar to human senses, teaching him to attune himself to vibrations that danced just beyond perception. Each session left him drained yet invigorated, as though he were shedding layers of doubt only to uncover new depths of purpose. The constellations etched into Alarian's skin seemed to mirror his journey, their shifting patterns reflecting the turbulence within. Outside the palace, tensions simmered. News of Cale's unprecedented access spread like wildfire, igniting debates among the Valerian elite. Some viewed him as a harbinger of salvation, a foreign element destined to restore equilibrium to their faltering world. Others saw him as a threat, a chaotic variable disrupting the delicate order they had struggled to maintain. Public gatherings grew heated, with factions forming around interpretations of ancient prophecies. Whispers of rebellion stirred in shadowy corners, fanned by those who feared change more than stagnation. Amid this unrest, Kale and Alarion forged an unspoken bond. Their interactions evolved from cautious exchanges to moments of raw vulnerability, each revelation pulling them closer despite the widening rifts around them. One evening, as they stood together beneath the twin moons, Alarion confessed her fears, not for herself, but for her people. "They look to me as if I am infallible," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "But I am not. I am as fragile as any of them, held together by threads thinner than you can imagine." Kale reached out instinctively, his hand hovering inches from hers before withdrawing. Physical contact remained taboo, a boundary neither dared cross. Yet, in that fleeting gesture, something profound passed between them, an acknowledgement of shared fragility, of mutual dependence. It was then that Kale realized the true nature of his role. He wasn't there to save her, he was there to stand beside her, to share the burden she had borne alone for so long. Back in the Nexus chamber, the crystalline structure began to respond more vividly to Kale's presence. Its light pulsed erratically at times, mirroring the emotional storms brewing within him. Alarion watched closely, her expression oscillating between hope and trepidation. "It recognizes you," she murmured one day, her voice barely audible over the hum of energy. "But recognition alone is not enough. You must become part of it." "What does that mean?" Kale asked, his tone edged with frustration. Despite his progress, the specifics of his task eluded him. Was he meant to merge with the Nexus? Sacrifice himself to stabilize it? The ambiguity gnawed at him, fueling sleepless nights and restless pacing. Alarion offered no immediate answers, instead leading him deeper into the labyrinthine corridors of the palace. They entered chambers rarely visited, their walls adorned with artifacts that seemed to breathe with latent power. One room housed a series of mirrors, each reflecting not physical forms but abstract shapes that shifted unpredictably. Another contained pools of liquid light, their surfaces rippling as though stirred by unseen winds. Through these spaces, Alarion guided him silently, allowing the environment to speak for itself. It was in the final chamber, a circular room dominated by a massive mural depicting intersecting galaxies, that Kale experienced a breakthrough. As he gazed upon the artwork, a sudden clarity washed over him. The Nexus wasn't merely a source of energy, it was a nexus of connections, a web linking every living being on Valara to the cosmos itself. To stabilize it required not brute force or singular sacrifice but unity, a collective effort to realign fractured bonds. Turning to Alarion, he voiced his epiphany. "I'm not here to fix it alone. None of us are. We need everyone. Your people, me, maybe even forces beyond this planet. Together, we can restore balance." Her eyes widened, reflecting a mixture of astonishment and relief. For the first time since their paths crossed, she smiled, a genuine, radiant expression that transformed her entire countenance. "You understand now," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "And if you can help them see what you've seen." But the path forward would not be easy. Convincing a divided populace to embrace unity required more than insight, it demanded action. Kale knew the next steps would test every ounce of courage and resolve he possessed. Yet, as he stood beside Alarion, feeling the weight of possibilities settle upon his shoulders, he felt ready. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. In the days that followed, Kale and Alarion embarked on a mission to bridge the chasm dividing the Valarian people. They traveled beyond the opulent confines of the palace, venturing into districts where resentment simmered beneath polished facades. Kale spoke openly, sharing his discoveries in halting yet earnest phrases, while Alarion translated his words into melodic cadences that resonated deeply with her kin. Together, they painted a vision of interconnectedness, emphasizing the shared responsibility required to preserve their world. The response was mixed. Some listened intently, their glowing eyes widening with dawning comprehension. Others remained skeptical, their distrust manifesting in muttered dissent or outright hostility. In one particularly volatile gathering, a faction of elders denounced Kale as an outsider unfit to meddle in matters beyond his understanding. Tensions escalated until Alarion intervened, her voice cutting through the discord like a blade of light. "Would you cast aside hope because it comes wrapped in unfamiliar skin?" she challenged, her authority undeniable. The crowd fell silent, though the underlying tension lingered. Meanwhile, the nexus grew increasingly unstable, its erratic pulses sending tremors through the crystalline structures of the city. Cracks began to appear in once pristine surfaces, and faint hums of distress echoed through the streets. These signs served as grim reminders of the stakes at hand, reinforcing the urgency of their cause. Kale worked tirelessly alongside Aaronian, attempting to channel the Nexus's energy into patterns that might temporarily stave off collapse. Their efforts yielded fleeting successes but never a lasting solution. One night, as exhaustion weighed heavily on both of them, Kale voiced a question that had haunted him since his arrival. "Why me?" he asked, his voice rough with fatigue. "Out of everyone, why did you choose to trust me?" Aaronian hesitated, her luminous gaze fixed on the horizon where the twin moons cast their silvery glow. "Because you saw me," she replied finally, her tone soft yet laden with meaning. "Not as a princess, not as a vessel, but as myself. And because, somehow, you remind me of what we've forgotten, that strength lies not in isolation but in connection." Her words struck a chord within him, resonating with a truth he hadn't fully articulated until now. Connection, that was the key. Not just between individuals, but between worlds, between dimensions, between the seen and unseen forces shaping existence. As he absorbed this realization, a plan began to crystallize in his mind, bold and precarious yet grounded in the lessons he'd learned. "We need to show them," he said suddenly, his voice gaining intensity. "Not just tell them. We need to create a link, a tangible demonstration of what unity looks like." Aaronian tilted her head, intrigued. "How?" Kale outlined his idea, a ritual combining elements of Valerian tradition with human ingenuity, designed to synchronize the energies of disparate groups. It would require collaboration from every corner of society, from artisans crafting symbolic artifacts to engineers adapting technology to interface with the Nexus. The undertaking would be monumental, fraught with risks, but it represented their best chance at forging a collective awakening. To his surprise, Aaronian embraced the concept wholeheartedly. "It is risky," she admitted, "but risk is inherent in any act of creation. Let us begin." Thus commenced a flurry of activity, with Kale and Aaronian coordinating efforts across the planet. They convened councils, mediated disputes, and inspired acts of cooperation that transcended long-standing divisions. Slowly, tentatively, the pieces began to fall into place. Artisans wove threads of light into intricate tapestries, engineers constructed devices capable of amplifying harmonious frequencies, and musicians composed symphonies attuned to the rhythms of the cosmos. Yet, even as progress unfolded, shadows loomed on the periphery. Dissenters plotted in secret, convinced that embracing an outsider signaled the end of their way of life. Whispers of sabotage rippled through the ranks, culminating in acts of vandalism targeting key components of the planned ritual. Each setback tested their resolve, forcing Kale and Aaronian to dig deeper into reserves of patience and perseverance. Through it all, their bond deepened, forged in the crucible of adversity. Moments of quiet solidarity punctuated the chaos, shared glances during tense negotiations, brief touches of reassurance when words failed. These fragments of intimacy became anchors, grounding them amidst the tempest. Finally, the day of the ritual arrived. The city buzzed with anticipation, its crystalline pathways thronged with citizens eager to witness history unfold. At the heart of the gathering stood the Nexus Chamber, transformed into a cathedral of light and sound. As participants took their positions, Kale and Aaronian exchanged a final glance, their unspoken promise echoing louder than any spoken vow. Then, as the first notes of the symphony rang out, a ripple of energy surged through the crowd. The Nexus responded, its light swelling to fill the chamber, bathing everyone present in an iridescent glow. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, the boundaries between self and other dissolving into a singular, unified consciousness. And then, just as abruptly, the moment shattered. A deafening roar erupted from the depths of the Nexus, shaking the very foundations of the palace. The ground trembled as cracks spiderwebbed across the chamber floor, and panicked cries filled the air. Kale grabbed Aaronian's hand, their connection blazing like a lifeline amidst the chaos. "It's resisting," she shouted over the din, her voice strained but resolute. "The balance is shifting." Kale yelled back, his mind racing. He realized the Nexus wasn't rejecting them, it was fighting to hold on, clinging to its old patterns. We have to push through. Trust me. Alarian nodded, closing her eyes as she channeled her energy into the crystal. Kale joined her, focusing every ounce of willpower he possessed. The light intensified, pulsing violently before stabilizing into a steady rhythm. Slowly, the tremors subsided. Around them, the Valerians stared in awe as the fractured city began to heal itself, cracked ceiling and structures glowing anew. Cheers erupted, tentative at first, then thunderous. Tears streamed down Alarian's face as she turned to Kale. "You did it," she whispered. "No," he replied, shaking his head. "We did." For the first time, she didn't pull away when he reached for her, their hands remaining intertwined. Outside, the twin moons cast their glow over a transformed world, where unity had taken root. Yet, as Kale looked up at the stars, he knew this was only the beginning, for both him and Alarian.